Most families hang the same number of photos on the wall as they have children. In the Whitmore house, there were 3 sons born on the same day from the same womb, but only 2 frames ever hung in the living room. One was Zachary, the football prodigy, the other Mason, the robotics genius, and then there was Rylan, third by minutes, forgotten by years. No one said it aloud, of course. That's the thing about being overlooked. It doesn't always scream. It just hums under every conversation, echoes in every missing invitation. Lingers in the silence after someone says, "You boys must make your parents so proud." Because Rylan knew they didn't mean him. From the time he was little, Rylan felt off script. While his brothers tackled each other on the front lawn and built drones in the garage, he was humming show tunes in the backyard, making up dances in the kitchen when he thought no one was watching. He wasn't weak, but his strength didn't look like theirs. He wasn't loud, but his quiet held volumes. Still in a family that praised touchdowns and stray A's, Rylan's talents, his voice, his heart, his softness, were never applauded. He learned early that being different in their Tennessee town came at a cost. When he was 12, he wrote in his journal that he liked a boy in his class. He didn't tell anyone, he didn't dare. But his mother found the journal tucked beneath his mattress. She didn't yell, she didn't cry. She just placed it on his desk, unspoken and untouched. Later that night, she brought up enrolling him in piano lessons again, said it might help redirect his energy. That was how things were handled in their home. Quiet disapproval wrapped in politeness, conversations that never happened, support that only showed up when it was convenient, when it didn't threaten the image they wanted to maintain. As Zachary got scholarships and Mason won awards, Rylan learned how to disappear in plain sight. At school events, he stood behind them in pictures. At church, his name was rarely mentioned in prayer lists. Even his own birthdays felt like afterthoughts. Double candles for his brothers and a leftover cupcake for him. But what hurt most wasn't the absence of recognition. It was how he started to believe he didn't deserve it, that somehow he was the problem. That being gay, being sensitive, being him, was a flaw that needed fixing. So Rylan became quiet. Careful, he stopped singing around the house. He edited himself down piece by piece to fit the invisible mold they had for him. By the time he was 17, he could predict exactly which version of himself his parents could tolerate. And that was the version he became. But inside, a spark stayed lit, a voice that refused to go silent. Every time he passed by his brother's photos in the living room, he whispered a promise only he could hear. "One day I won't need a frame on this wall to prove I existed." This is not a story about being the forgotten one. It's a story about what happens when the one they erased refuses to stay invisible. If you've ever felt like the quiet one in the room, the one overlooked by family or love or life itself, stay with us. Rylan's journey is yours too. And on Heart Stories, we don't forget the ones the world tried to hide. Subscribe now for stories that speak your truth. Rylan left Tennessee the way most queer kids do, when the world around them tightens too far quietly. He packed his bag the night before and caught the 6:10 a.m. Greyhound. His acceptance letter folded so many times the creases had started to tear. No one came to the station, no one asked for his schedule. The family group chat didn't mention him leaving. Zachary had a college football signing event that weekend. Mason was prepping for a summer internship at MIT. And Rylan. He had a one-way bus ticket to New York City, a partial scholarship to a small arts conservatory in Queens, and a voice that still shook every time he used it. New York was not easy. The city didn't open its arms. It handed him keys to a basement sublet that smelled like mold and old oil, a room barely wide enough for a twin mattress and a second-hand keyboard. The school cafeteria served meals that reminded him he didn't have a dining plan. And his southern drawl, no matter how carefully he tried to flatten it, made people look at him like he didn't belong. But for the first time in his life, Rylan saw other boys walking down the street holding hands. He saw girls in drag and boys in heels, and no one stared. He heard laughter that didn't hide behind shame. He watched someone belt a Whitney Houston ballad in the subway with their whole chest, and not a single person told him to be quiet. It was in those small, wild moments that Rylan's lungs began to open. He wasn't ready to stand in the spotlight, but he started singing in rehearsal rooms again. Just to himself, he hummed while washing dishes at the coffee shop where he worked the weekend shifts. He scribbled lyrics into the corners of his notebooks, almost too softly for even the paper to hold them. One night, everything changed. A classmate named Elsie invited him to a basement drag show in Brooklyn. He almost said no. He was tired and broke and terrified of being seen. But something in her voice told him, This wasn't just a party. It was an invitation to breathe. The bar was underground in every sense. No signage, no stage lights, just string bulbs and raw brick walls. The floor sticky from years of dancing and spilled beer. But when the first queen stepped out dressed like a blooming orchid, lip-syncing, as if the lyrics came from somewhere ancient and sacred, Rylan felt like he was witnessing church for the first time. Elsie nudged him. "You should try it." He laughed, but the idea lodged somewhere in his chest. 2 weeks later, he borrowed a pair of heels from a classmate, stitched a makeshift dress from old curtains, and walked trembling onto that same cement floor. His drag name, Ella, soft reclaiming of the name that had once felt like a burden. He didn't know if the audience would laugh or look away. But when the music started and his voice slipped out, not a lip sync, but a raw, unrehearsed cover of You Don't Own Me, the room didn't move. For 3 minutes, he sang as if his family were finally listening, as if the walls of that tiny Tennessee home had cracked open just wide enough for his truth to echo through. When the song ended, there was silence, then clapping, then cheering. People who had never met him were screaming his name, Ryl, as if it had always belonged to someone powerful. He went home barefoot that night, heels slung over his shoulder, mascara running down his cheeks, and laughed for the first time in what felt like years. Not the polite kind of laugh he used at home, a deep stomach-cramping laugh that said, "I made it through today." That night, he wrote in his journal, "They don't know I exist, but today I did loudly." Rylan didn't tell his family. He didn't send pictures or updates. The silence from home had stopped hurting. It had become space he could now fill with his own music, his own stories, his own name. And the city, as brutal and indifferent as it was, had handed him something no one else ever had, a stage without permission. Because sometimes the only way to exist is to stop asking for approval and just be. Rylan never chased fame. He only ever wanted to be seen. But New York has a strange way of turning echoes into anthems when the timing is right. It began with a short clip, shaky phone footage from a Friday night at the Brooklyn venue, just 10 seconds of Rylan singing the final line of an original song. "You can't erase the quiet one, we always come back louder." Someone posted it on TikTok with the caption, "Who is Ryl and why am I crying?" The video exploded. Within days, it was remixed into audio reels, background tracks, even dance remakes. Without warning, his voice was everywhere, but his name still wasn't. He watched thousands of people sing along to his words, not knowing who he was, where he came from, or how hard it had been just to get to that microphone. And then came the email. A creative director from a luxury fashion brand had seen the clip. They were launching a campaign about reclamation, visibility, and self-expression. Would Rylan, not Ryl, but the boy behind the voice, be willing to record a full version of the song? No face needed, just sound. Rylan said yes, quietly, cautiously. He didn't think it would go far. 2 months later, the ad dropped. A slow-motion montage of models in vintage suits, street dancers in glitter boots, drag queens holding hands with their younger selves. The background, Rylan's voice raw, unfiltered, every breath audible. And in the final frame, a close-up of lips mouthing his lyric, then black screen, then his name. Rylan Whitmore, artist-composer. Voice of visibility. It aired on every major platform, Times Square, LA billboards, digital bus stops in cities he'd never been to. For the first time, the world said his name. But at home in Tennessee, his phone buzzed for a different reason. Zachary texted, "Is this really you on the Vogue thing? What the hell, Ry?" Then Mason, "Just saw Mom close the laptop when your ad came on. Guess we're all watching now." He stared at the messages for hours, unsure what he was supposed to feel. Pride, bitterness, relief. All he felt was the weight of something he tried to outrun, pressing against his chest again. Because no matter how many screens he appeared on, he still didn't have a photo on the family wall. The network that ran the ad wanted to film a short hometown feature, from small town boy to global voice. A producer asked if Rylan would return to Tennessee for one weekend, visit his high school, talk to his neighbors, maybe stop by his childhood home. He hesitated. He hadn't been back in 3 years, not since he left on that silent morning, not since he rebuilt himself from a footnote into a headline. But something in him whispered, "Go, not for them, for you." He didn't warn anyone, didn't post about it, just boarded the plane and landed in the heat of a southern summer. Same cracked pavement, same empty streets after sundown. He arrived at the house unannounced. The grass was neatly trimmed, the flag still hung by the porch, and when his mother opened the door, she looked surprised. Not happy, not angry, just surprised. He stepped inside. Everything looked smaller, quieter. His brothers weren't there. His father barely glanced up from the TV. Rylan asked to see his old room. His mother said, "That's Mason's gym now. You know he needed a space for his equipment." The words landed without venom. She wasn't trying to hurt him, but it hurt anyway. They sat in silence. No one mentioned the ad. No one said, "Congratulations." No one asked how he was doing. Finally, Rylan reached into his bag and placed an envelope on the table. It held a printed invitation to his first solo concert, an official debut at a sold-out theater in New York City. "I don't need you to come," he said, voice steady. "I just wanted you to know I'm not hiding anymore." His mother didn't reach for the envelope. He stood, walked to the door, and glanced back only once. And in that moment, he understood something deeply painful and strangely freeing. Recognition from the world would never replace the love he never received at home. But it didn't have to, because he had built something bigger than their silence, something loud, undeniable, and entirely his. The marquee lights outside the theater glowed with a name no one in Rylan's hometown ever thought they'd see: Rylan Whitmore, live in New York. Not Ryl, not anonymous voice. His real name, his full self. Inside the room was pulsing. Tickets had sold out in under an hour. Rows filled with young queer artists, drag performers, industry insiders, strangers who said his lyrics had pulled them out of the dark. The air hummed with anticipation. But behind the curtain, Rylan stood still, hands pressed to his chest, trying to anchor his breath. He wasn't scared of the crowd. He wasn't scared of the songs. He was scared of what came after. Because no matter how many eyes were on him now, there was still one pair that had never looked at him properly. One seat that would remain empty, center balcony, row B, seat 5, the ticket he'd reserved under his mother's name, just in case. The stage manager gave him the final nod. Lights dimmed. Applause rose like thunder. Rylan stepped out into the beam of a single spotlight. No smoke, no dramatics, just him in a tailored black suit, soft makeup, and a silver chain inherited from his grandmother. He opened with the song that had gone viral, the one they'd called the anthem for the invisible. But this time he sang it not to be seen, but to remember the boy who never was. Every note was steady, every lyric a quiet rebellion against years of being dismissed, quieted, minimized. The crowd stood. People cried, but Rylan didn't. Not yet. He moved into newer songs, one about his first kiss stolen behind a curtain in the school theater, one about the smell of fried chicken grease on his mother's apron when she hugged him goodnight as a child, songs that weren't angry but honest. And then came the final piece, a ballad called Seat by the Wall, where he sat on the edge of the stage. No lights, no music at first, just the hush of a room that knew something sacred was about to happen. "They gave me a seat by the wall," he began, "where elbows and silence meet, said you're still part of the picture, but not where the light is sweet." The song built slowly, describing a child who grows up eating dinner from the kitchen counter while his siblings sit at the table. A teenager who listens to church sermons that tell him to repent for who he is. A young man who learns to dance alone. But in the final verse, the tone shifts. "So I built a new table with room for my sound, for voices too quiet for dreams underground. And if you still can't find me, just follow the flame. I don't sit by the wall now. The wall wears my name." The room erupted. Not in noise, but in stillness. The kind of silence only reverence can make. He stood bowed once and walked backstage, hands trembling, vision blurring. But before the door closed behind him, the stagehand whispered, "Hey, someone left this for you, said it was urgent." A small envelope, handwritten, the handwriting unmistakable, his mother's. He stared at it for a long time before sitting down on the dressing room floor and carefully opening the flap inside one photo. A framed picture from when he was 6, him standing in the backyard covered in mud, holding up a toy microphone. On the back, 3 words: "I saw you," no apology, no signature. Just a sentence that shattered years of pretending he didn't need to be seen. Rylan pressed the photo to his chest. And for the first time since he boarded that Greyhound bus years ago, he cried. Not from loss, not from pain, but from the ache of being held by a truth he never thought would arrive. That even if love comes late, it still counts. And outside, beyond the walls of the theater, Times Square glowed with his name. Not in spite of who he was, but because of it. Months passed, Rylan's face began to appear in places where once only voices had lived. He was invited to perform at Pride events, headline queer music festivals, speak on panels about visibility and art. But even with all the light, he moved carefully, never chasing fame, never forgetting the boy who used to hum quietly in the kitchen just to feel like he existed. He didn't hear from his family again, not directly. But word reached him, through old classmates, through social media glimpses, that his brothers were proud but not public, and that his mother had started watching his interviews on silent. Rylan didn't resent them. Not anymore, Salman. Something had shifted in him the night of the concert, when the photo arrived and the words, "I saw you," finally made space for peace. He began to volunteer with youth shelters, places that housed kids like him, queer teens who had left home not because they wanted to, but because home had stopped being safe. He taught songwriting workshops, brought in drag artists to perform, created a tiny studio out of leftover grant money. He named it Seat by the Wall. Every young person who walked through the door got to record one original piece. No filters, no expectations, just them. Heard. One evening after a showcase, a boy with red sneakers and tear-streaked cheeks approached him. "I was told I should stop singing, that it wasn't for people like me," the boy said. "But then I found your video." He didn't finish the sentence, just hugged Rylan tight and wordless. And Rylan knew this was it. His name didn't need to hang in his parents' living room. It didn't need to be etched in platinum records. It only needed to live on in places where silence used to win. On his 30th birthday, he returned to Tennessee, not to make a point, not to be forgiven, just to walk freely through the town that once tried to erase him. At the public library, there was a display called Local Legacies, photos of authors, teachers, athletes, and tucked into the center, a new edition, a black and white portrait. Rylan mid-performance below it. Rylan Whitmore, musician advocate, former student of Willow Creek High. For the ones who found their voice last and still sang, no fanfare, no ribbon, just truth. And in that moment, he understood. Some stories don't need revenge. They don't need to be rewritten. They just need to be told, because the world doesn't get to decide which voices matter. We do. Have you ever felt like Rylan, like your voice was too quiet to be heard? Or maybe someone made you believe you didn't belong? If so, when was the moment you finally chose to be seen? Share it in the comments. Someone out there needs your story too on Heart Stories. We don't just tell stories, we tell your stories. Stories of the forgotten, the silenced. The ones who dared to speak anyway. Subscribe now and never miss the moment where healing begins. And remember, even if they gave you a seat by the wall, you're allowed to build your own stage.